Might want to do a roll call. I'm not sure who we have, but
Well, I welcome you to the Great Falls International Airport March 31st board meeting. The mission of the airport authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region. The vision of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Welcome, and please remember that this board appreciates participation from the public. If you have comments throughout this board meeting or the work session, I will address those in a moment here. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call. Of course, it's going to be a verbal vote. So commissioners, if you are on the line, please indicate when I call your name. Commissioner Eretz?
Present.
Commissioner Gibbs? Commissioner Gibbs?
Present.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Lalonde?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, I'm here.
Commissioner Timbo?
Here.
Commissioner Evans, I am present and standing in for Commissioner Bakke, who is absent today. I'm going to pause several times as we go through this meeting agenda today. If there are public who aren't sure that they should speak, if you do request to speak, please start your comments by indicating your name. The same for the commission members, please, in case we can't understand who we're hearing from on the phone. Please start your comments each time with your name. I'm going to also ask the public who is here in some format with us today and who expect to speak during the meeting to go ahead and identify themselves now. Let's start with the ones here in the room.
I am Jean Faure, F-A-U-R-E. I am the attorney representing United Materials of Great Falls with respect to the bid issue.
And I'm sorry, could you add your address too? I believe we need that.
Certainly. Our physical address is 1314 Central Avenue in Great Falls, Montana.
Rob Skowinski, S-K-A-W-I-N-S-K-I, with United Materials, here about the same issue. Address is 2100 9th Avenue North.
Okay, are there other members of the public at this time who know that they will be planning to speak during the meeting? I will ask this again several times. No? The other thing... Oh. Yes? Hello? Did you hear that? Did somebody...
Hey, Deb.
Yeah?
Can you hear me, Deb? This
Yeah.
is Laura.
Yes? Yes, Laura?
Could we just ask that everybody who is on the phone put their phone on mute unless they're talking? We've got a lot of feedback on the phone.
Right, I was just gonna do that next. So why don't we go ahead and do that right now? And then let me know if it's better, Laura.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, did someone else ask to be recognized?
Chairman Evans, this is Mary Moe.
Okay. Okay, Mary, and your address, please?
8 Prospect Drive,
Okay,
59405.
thank you. Anyone else at this point? The other difference from our normal procedures that we've identified right now is when we do take votes, the authority will be asked to do a roll call vote each time that we need to take an action. I think that gets us through the beginning. John, you agree?
Yes.
I do have a little funny thing to say here today. It's only funny, I suppose, if you're sitting here in the room where I'm the only commissioner here, that I read somewhere once, and I can't even attribute it to the right source, but the most effective way to handle a meeting or a committee is with one. And so I feel like I'm in that position today because I can't see any of you, but we'll get through it. It'll be, I think, a first for the authority in anyone's history they can recall at any rate. We're going to forego the Pledge of Allegiance and jump right into the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Excuse me. This month we have A, approval of board meeting minutes from February 2019. B, payroll checks totaling $94,609.74. C, maintenance and operations checks number 25258 through 25301 totaling $95,495.49. D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $50,000. And E, financial reports for February 2019. Commissioners, are there any items that you wish to pull or to discuss at this time? If not, I would entertain an action. Commissioners?
Commissioner Gibbs makes the motion to approve the consent agenda as listed. Commissioner Smith,
Commissioner Smith, I hear you.
Yeah, I second it.
All right, we have a motion made by Commissioner Gibbs and seconded by Commissioner Smith. Is there any discussion? If not, I will do a roll call for the question. So if you would just indicate when I call your name. Commissioner Eretz?
I approve.
Commissioner Gibbs?
I approve.
Commissioner Lalonde?
I approve.
Commissioner Smith?
I approve.
And Commissioner Timbo?
Approve.
And Commissioner Evans approves as well. So the motion to approve the consent agenda as presented is passed. Moving along, we'll go into John Faulkner's director's report.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. We'll keep this very brief in order to consolidate the meeting. One item of note is we were notified this morning that we're likely to see National Guard in all the Montana airports Thursday or Friday. They'll be serving in a capacity of taking temperatures. These are not medically trained personnel. They'll most likely be from one of the deployable units in the state. Either what we're told, probably the folks out east that are, I think, are Army. And so they'll be taking temperatures in the terminal. Should they find someone with a temperature above 100.4, they'll be taking them to a private space and conducting a Skype call with one of the medical providers in the city. That's the current operational plan. We have not had our briefing with the National Guard yet. We anticipate they'll be calling us at some point in the next day to discuss details. We're currently looking to close the upstairs restroom bank permanently until this procedure is done in order to use those for screening. That's a space that we can easily sanitize once we're done. Then what we're told is if anyone refuses either the initial temperature screening or the subsequent medical screening, they'll be allowed to go on their way. Obviously, we're all aware of the ramifications of detainment, those types of things, and we'll be looking to avoid that. The airports won't have any direct participation in these screenings, so they'll be happening as people come off of the airplane. That's the plan. As I said, this is new information this morning. All the airports discussed it last night, and no one had been briefed on this until this morning. So details are forthcoming, but just want to let everybody know that's happening. Secondly, we're continuing to estimate the impacts of the current downturn on our traffic. As we've said, the fiscal year cuts the impact likely in half between the current fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, and the next fiscal year. Right now, it looks as though we're anticipating about a 35% activity decline in both fiscal years. That's the forecast we're currently working on. And Maria and I are working on the budget for next year and the financial forecasting around that. We're hoping to be able to push some information out to you guys in the next 2 weeks regarding what we think the impact is going to be financially. And the initial indications that we're able to move some things around, limiting our marketing budget primarily on the operating side. We're also looking at some refinancing opportunities with how we're charging the airlines for capital projects, just changing the way we're doing that and applying the discretionary grant that we just found out about we actually had it at the last board meeting, we mentioned it, applying that against the capital costs for this year. And so we don't see a major rate impact to the airlines either this year or next year. We think we can hold rates stable, control costs, and with a lower activity base, continue to keep the rates where they are. We're looking at revenue declines to see in the next year or two what we might get. We think we're bracketing a downturn of about 200,000 to 400,000 between, say, 200,000 this year, maybe 400,000 max next year. Fortunately, we've had quite a bit of revenue growth over the last 4 or 5 years from non-airline specific revenue sources, the Love's development, the Eagle Jet development, those types of things. And the eventual turnover of the FedEx lease, which is on the agenda today, should impact us positively too. And so we think the overall impacts, we've got some ways to mitigate them, and we're confident that we can control the cost side also. More details to follow on all of that. That's all I have.
Okay. Okay. We'll be moving into the action items then. I'm going to ask that John introduce the 2 items on the agenda currently. I'll be looking for commissioners to sponsor an action so that we actually have an action on the floor. And then we'll have comments, questions, discussion, and move on from there. So the first item today is the sale of the FedEx building and lease negotiations as part of that.
Yes, good afternoon. Again, John Faulkner. The item in front of the board today is the sale of the FedEx building and a new land lease for that FedEx building. As some of you may recall, I'll go into greater detail since folks aren't all here. As some of you may recall, this building was constructed back in the late 90s using a tenant financing tool. And the way that works is it's a tax-exempt bond. The building must revert to the public entity at the end of the lease. The lease is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year, and the financing overhangs that expiration by about a year. So the time has come to obviously renegotiate that construct. And what we're proposing today, we've been working on for about 3 years, is converting this financing and lease where we technically own the building to a land lease with FedEx owning the building, much like most of the developments we have here at the airport. And so several years ago, the board authorized an appraisal of the FedEx building and also subsequent negotiations to sell that building as part of that motion. The appraised value of that building about 3 years ago was $2.5 million. That's as is, where is. If you've done many appraisals, it just basically assumes that all of the building systems function as they should. In the course of looking at this purchase, FedEx has conducted a more extensive facility review, and they've determined there are several areas of the building that require some attention. Namely, the HVAC system needs to be rebalanced, and that's going to cost them about $75,000. We have done quite a bit of work on that system. I think my maintenance guys would wholly agree that it does need a rebalancing. Having been there for 20 years and different wall configurations and whatnot, that building does need some work on the HVAC side. In addition, they've also asked that they be able to replace the roof, which is about $645,000. They have quotes for both of those. We did have warranty work done on that roof a few years ago. I think it's been 5-6 years ago that the warranty work was done, and we no longer have a warranty on that roof. Those large rubber roofs can only have a useful life of about 20 years in an environment such as ours, and so we would agree that that is likely work that needs to be done in the foreseeable future. And so we are in agreement with FedEx that those are reasonable deducts from the appraised value of the building. When you deduct those items, you're left with a building sale amount of $1,780,921. That's what FedEx would pay for the building. That money would largely be used to repay all the bonds. We are required by that financing tool to repay the bonds in order to transfer the ownership of the building. So we'll have to set up some type of simultaneous escrow deposit where that money would come in and immediately be paid to the trustee before the ownership is transferred. That's the sales side of the transaction. Once the building is owned by FedEx, then we would also have a ground lease that would take over for the current lease that's there. FedEx would be leasing both the footprint of the building and the truck docks, what we would call the land side. They would also be leasing on a preferred basis the air side, which is the ramp. And so the tools we've got that we've agreed to with FedEx to do that are a simple land lease for the building and the land side portion, which starts out at about $70,205 per year based on the square footage, and then a preferred lease on the ramp for about $47,075 in the initial year. All of those are escalated by a CPI escalator once you get out there a few years out. In addition to the two land leases, the ramp is also 20 years old, and it requires some maintenance, or will require some maintenance in the next few years. One of the items we know that we need to work on in the nearer future is the replacement of the current glycol system. When that system was built many years ago, a vaulted system was a common option. The problem with a vaulted system is there is no opportunity to mitigate the glycol. You just have to remit the glycol to a closed system like a sewer system and have it treated by the local sewer plant. Unfortunately, that concentration of chemical was causing some issues with the city's system down below, and they had asked us to stop remitting that into their system. And so what we're doing today is we're collecting that material and putting it in our evaporation ponds where the rest of the glycol is evaporated. We need to replace that system going forward and add an evaporation apparatus to it. In an arid climate like ours, evaporation is best practice. Most airports in the West use an evaporation technology. Even back east, it's commonly used, but back there, you often have to churn it and work it to get it to evaporate because of the higher humidity. In our case, all of the glycol evaporates every year because we are such an arid environment. And so that's what we're proposing, is that we would replace that glycol system. We would also do panel replacements. Most likely the slot drain will need replaced in the middle of the ramp over the lease period. And so we're charging FedEx a ramp improvement fee that would go into a reserve account. It would not be considered revenue. It would be a capital reserve. And that would be $353,000 per year that would be deposited into that account. And mostly that is based on the cost of replacing the glycol pond, or installing a glycol pond, replacing the glycol collection system, and a certain number of panel replacements over the lease period. We're recommending a lease a term of initial 20 years with a 10-year extension at FedEx's option. That's very typical to our current land leases that we've done recently, total of 30 years for FedEx to have that ramp. And let's see, I think I got the leases, I got the sale, I got the reserve deposit, I think I got it all. And so we're recommending to the board that you would approve the sale of the FedEx building, a new lease for the FedEx building as detailed in the recommended action.
Yeah, so as I previously mentioned, do I have commissioners who will sponsor and second that motion at this point?
You might be on mute if you're trying to talk.
Yeah.
Oprah, why didn't
Commissioners, do you need a motion or a second?
I haven't heard either yet.
Well, I will make a motion to approve the recommendations of the airport director for the sale of the FedEx building.
And that's Tony, right? Or
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Is there a second?
Yes, I will second it.
Okay, the motion.
Was that Commissioner Gibbs?
No, Smith. Smith?
Was it?
I think Smith. Am I right on that? Was that you, Commissioner Smith? Second?
Yes,
Okay.
David Smith.
Okay, thank you.
Second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion or questions?
Yeah, this is Todd. So the appraisal was for 2.5 in 2017, and it says it was as is. And, you know, obviously they need these repairs, but boy, that's a significant amount less than supposedly the appraised value at 2.5. I'm just curious if, you know, they came up with these amounts, but if we met them halfway or something, or, I mean, I'm obviously not involved in the discussion, but it just seems like, and as is appraisal at 2.5, and now we're selling it for 1.7. John, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. The first is, remember, this is a tenant-financed building. So in essence, FedEx has paid for the building construction. That is the majority of their rent over the last 20 years. So the entirety of the airport never built, you know, the initial $2 million building or whatever the initial building amount was. We never guaranteed that debt. It was entirely guaranteed by the FedEx lease. So the building has been constructed using that FedEx lease as the collateral. Secondly, it's very difficult to value something like this because there aren't similarly situated items like this in the community. It's adjacent to an airport ramp, and it's primarily an air cargo building, and the FAA guidelines that prohibit the use of that building from other uses apply. So we have to use it for an aviation use unless there is no aviation use available, in which case we could try to find a secondary use. The 2.5 million values the building as if we could find another tenant. The main problem is there just isn't another tenant. It's a tenant use facility, and so the appraiser expressed a lot of difficulty in placing a value on the building because there aren't many buildings like it in the community, and there are very few users that would want it. And so we have this sort of odd duck that they tried to value. And so the appraisal that was done a couple years ago spends a lot of time talking about that. And 2.5 is the middle of a range of the appraised value that goes all the way down, I believe, down to 2 million and all the way up, potentially to 3 million, just based on the different valuation methods that the appraiser had. And so, you know, I certainly understand what you're saying. I think the hesitation that FedEx would say, I think if you ask them is, hey, we've paid for this building once, we're prepared to pay for it again, but we want to ensure that we have something that's going to last the lease period, you know, to regain our value in making this purchase.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey John, this is Casey.
Okay, Todd, were you done with your question? Todd Timbo?
I just said they're getting a good deal, and I just was curious if we counted it all, or if there was any negotiation done there, but.
Yeah, no, there's been 3 years of back and forth on this issue. You know, there's a lot of other considerations. FedEx, for example, is half of our landing fees. And today, if you look at the deal we've had for 20 years, the rent is about half of what we're proposing to charge in the future, and we have no way to recover the capital costs or operating expenses of the building. What we're doing in giving them this building is we're giving them the operating costs of the building. In the past, over the last 20 years, whenever we had to send a crew to go over there and fix a leak, in some cases we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars when air conditioners went out. You know, that was all you know, money that came out of our pocket. And so as the deal, as it says here, we could certainly try to charge them a commercial rent. I mean, if profit is the motive on that, you know, we could charge them a commercial rent and inherit the risk of what happens to that building over the next 20 years, and also have a much shorter term type of lease arrangement. In that case, it'd probably be a 5-year lease deal. And we might come out on the positive, yet again, we might not. And, you know, 5 years down the road, if Billings has a building available, and they decided to go to one of the bigger cities in the state, there goes half the landing fees with it. And so, I mean, you know, I think we were in a good negotiating position. The guidance of the board over the last 3 years has always been, number one, keep them in the community long term. And number two, provide them a good value where they get to decide what investments they make in the building over the next 20 years. And you know, we're not inheriting that cost because the expense side is concerning too. And so, you know, there was quite a bit of back and forth on this, and you know, that's you see us charging a lot less for the building going forward than maybe we could have. But on the ramp side, we're protected, and we have a way to fund the improvement of that ramp, and we limit our operating costs going forward. And so, you know, that's really been the discussion over the last 3 years or so. Is number one, make sure they stay in the community. Number two, you know, let's transfer the operating risk of the building. And let's do that in a fair way. And so, you know, there's still, even after the debt is retired, we'll still have some funds left over, which we hope to use to retire some of our other debt, and you know, that'll help us too in the long run. So, I feel it's been a good negotiation. Laura, I don't know, you've definitely been part of this as long as me. Would you like to express any other thoughts on this?
I don't really have a lot to add. I agree. I think that we have gone back and forth, and they're an important tenant, and I think it's a fair deal. I do understand what Todd is saying, but I think that we need to keep them there, and this is a way to do that.
It's pretty difficult to get FedEx to invest in your community, and most communities our size, even much larger towns, Colorado Springs, they lease those facilities and they come and they go. And I think to get them to invest a couple $1 million in our community to come in and own something and commit to a 20-year commitment in our community is a pretty big deal.
No, I agree. And I wasn't questioning the sale compared to the lease. It was just how we got to that amount. It just kind of seemed like, oh, we got a couple of big expenses and then here's an amount. But anyway, I appreciate your feedback.
Sure.
Commissioner
Hey,
Lalonde?
John, this is Rich, just real quick. Has there been any discussion regarding the
length of a new lease with FedEx?
Yeah, what we talked about is a 20-year lease with a 10-year option at their discretion. That's the same lease that we've been doing with like iState and Eagle Jet. It's been kind of the standard lease.
And they've been receptive to that approach? That
Yeah, they said that was a good length for them.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lalonde?
Yeah, hey, this is Commissioner Lalonde. I had the same question as Todd. Thanks for the answers there. One sort of related question, but John, I'm wondering if you have any idea if FedEx may be reposturing, or if they would reposture with the big downturn that we're looking at right now in the economy?
You mean
If they're posturing Great Falls at all?
It's hard to say how that's going to impact them. I mean, I think, you know, if you just look at the online retailer stocks in the last few weeks, you can see that they're hot as a coal, you know, and so I think, you know, FedEx probably stands to recover quicker than most of the industry. Going forward, this isn't actually a way for them to lower their costs in Great Falls because we'd be retiring this debt a full year early. And so we can go, you know, as soon as we can get this retired, we can go from, you know, a couple $100,000 a year in debt service to just this ground rent. And so if you look at it in the long haul, it's actually saving them quite a bit of money to do this ahead of the debt expiration and make that savings for them. And so, you know, they have said they understand that it's a good deal for them. They understand we're being a good partner. And I don't think that they will, you know, they may not immediately get to this because they're trying to figure out how to put out fires. But they had just asked us 2 weeks ago to expedite this, and so I think being ready is the right call right now. And certainly, as they look to lower their costs, if they do look to lower their costs, this is one way we can do that almost immediately by retiring that debt out with those proceeds from the sale and reducing that cost immediately.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from the commission?
You know, one thing I would add just on value, you know, and Laura, you can speak to this too. We did talk to a couple local brokers about the deal that we were putting together. You know, we did, you know, sort of off the record say, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking of doing on the commercial brokerage side. And the feedback we got is it's a good deal, but you know that sale price is a good value for us too. And so I think we've kind of hit the fair point with that 2.7. That you know it is a you know it's a good deal for both parties for different reasons. Retiring that debt out helps them out. You know, I would have guessed the building would have come in at $2 million on the appraisal. That's kind of the number I had in mind, just based on the size of it and having seen facilities at other airports. And so I really feel like we've struck a pretty good balance there.
Are there any other airport commission comments? I've been hearing a lot of joining or leaving the meeting. Are there any public comments on this issue? Any additional staff comments? Okay, then hearing none, let's go ahead with the vote. Again, it's a roll call. Commissioner Eretz?
I approve.
Commissioner Gibbs?
Approve.
Commissioner Lalonde?
I approve.
Commissioner Smith? Commissioner Smith? Did we lose you? Dave, are you there?
Yeah, Smith, I approve.
Okay.
Item failure.
Commissioner Timbo?
Approve.
And Evans approves as well, so it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Yep, that concludes that, and on to the second item on the agenda, which is acceptance of bids for 2020 landside improvements. John?
Yes, our capital project for this year, as approved by the board, is to renovate the roadways, pretty much from outside the terminal building back to the FedEx building. There's also a component of that where we'll go out and repave the Front Range Road, and then we'll finish the general aviation road that will go to the private hangars and actually out onto the airfield. In the aviation park down at the other end of the airfield. And so we put this out to bid and received 2 bids for the program, MRTE and United Materials. You can see in the packet here we have the summation of their bids. The apparent low bidder was MRTE. We've received a protest letter from United Materials indicating there's a couple deficiencies in that bid. The recommendation of the staff is that we would award that bid, and we would treat those deficiencies as it says in our bid documents. We're allowed to waive any formalities, and we're allowed to look past these types of inconsistencies with the bid documents, and that would be our recommendation, that this would be awarded to the low bidder, MRTE. And as I said, we have received a formal complaint on this, and so I just want to note that to the board, and as we move forward with the motion, we'll definitely want to allow for public comment so we can vet that concern from United Materials.
So again, I ask the commissioners if we have a motion and a second supporting the motion to accept the low bid MRTE. Do I hear a motion and a second?
This is Commissioner Ernst. I'll make the motion to accept Airport Director's recommendation to accept MRT's bid as presented.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Gibson, second.
I'm sorry, was that Gibbs?
Commissioner Gibbs.
Gibbs?
Yeah. So I would recommend we open the floor for public comment
Right.
and do that. We could do that along with the board comment and discussion on this.
Sure. Let's see here. Just a point of clarification. So the commissioners, you have all seen the letter of protest. Is that correct? Commissioners?
Yes, sure, yes.
Okay. Okay. So who would like to speak first? Do we have, would the public like to address this first? Does that make more sense at this point?
Commissioners, this is Jean Four on behalf of United Materials. I do appreciate the opportunity to elaborate on our written protest and remind you that the pre-bid meeting agenda
Can we pause a minute?
Sure. Can you
Somebody's
pause?
not on mute, so nobody can hear.
Oh, there's a
So everyone on the phone needs to go on mute so we can hear. Sorry for
Oh,
interrupting.
that's all right. Did you all catch that? We need you to mute your phones to stop the reverberation on this end. Okay, let's try it again. Sorry.
Not a problem. We're living in interesting times and appreciate again the opportunity. My name is Jean Four. I am an attorney with Four Holden. We represent United Materials of Great Falls. Appreciate the opportunity to elaborate on our written protest. As I was indicating, on March 11, 2020, the Great Falls International Airport circulated its pre-bid meeting agenda. At that time, it set forth the bid requirements. There are specific mandates under those requirements that include, but are not necessarily limited to, the contractor must provide an itemized breakdown of the lump sum bid items, and the contractor must or shall submit overhead and profit percentages to bid items. When the bids were received and opened, it is at that point that MRTE's bid should have been deemed non-responsive because it did not include the mandated items set forth in the bid requirements. So as an incomplete bid, it should not have even been considered or read by the airport authority. What the airport authority then did was allowed MRTE to subsequently correct or complete the bid that was submitted. And the question then is, well, what if United Materials wants to revise its bid? What irregularities or informalities are simply going to be ignored by the airport authority under its provision that it can waive any informality or irregularity? It is United Materials' position that this isn't simply an informality or irregularity that can be waived. And candidly, by accepting MRTE's bid, this is simply holding contractors to disparate standards. We're going to ignore the bid requirements for some, but not for others. It puts, quite frankly, a meaningless consideration for United Materials or any other contractor that follows the provisions that are set forth. And it sets a very dangerous and obvious precedent. Our other issue is that the entire procurement process may be invalid because, at least based on the information that we have to date, there is not a formal process in place for United Materials to protest the bid should the board decide to award it to MRTE. With that, we would urge that the Airport Authority Board disregard the incomplete and irregular bid that was received from MRTE. And I appreciate your time and ask you to give serious consideration to this issue, which is extremely important not only for United Materials with respect to this particular bid, but going forward in the future for any bids that the Airport Authority may solicit either from United Materials or any other contractor. Thank you.
Could I offer just a quick comment or a couple of questions? So just so I'm clear, the requested action from United Materials is that we would disqualify the MRTE bid and award to United Materials. That's the requested action.
Well, that'll reopen the bid process and hold all contractors to the same standards that you set forth on March 11.
Okay.
We understand that MRTE was the low bid and obviously support the airport's authority's interest in going with the low bid. But if the process is corrupt from the very beginning, it seems very problematic that any contractor, whether it's in this situation or others, or MRTE or some other contractor, simply can ignore the mandates that the airport authority puts out. It's got to operate just like the state and the federal regulations, which if the state opens a bid envelope and it's incomplete or hasn't followed the necessary process, those are deemed non-responsive and not even considered. And we urge the airport authority to follow that same protocol.
Okay, and just another point of clarity. My understanding was that you did receive our procurement rules, and the last point in those procurement rules are bid protest, and so The process that's laid out in the bid protest is that we would receive a protest letter, as you guys have done, and the board would adjudicate that, the bid protest. They would hear the complaint and determine what the best course of action is based on that complaint. And so that's our hope, is that the board will consider this bid protest and the facts involved in it, and that we would be able to make a determination based on the complaint and what's best. And one thing that we all are aware of is these, from time to time there are these types of inconsistencies in the proposals. They do happen. The bid requirements are extremely long. One thing we've tried to do from the invitation to bid that was published publicly right in the front there, where it talks about the GFIAA reserving the right to waive informalities. We do that again in the instructions to bidders, which are part of those bid documents. Over on page 2.1312, similar language that allows us the right to waive informalities. So we try to keep that out there for these types of situations. And then again, in the FAA Section 20 section, this is the published FAA procurement rules, Section 20, which was part of the bid documents. On page 20-2, again, there's language both 20-2 and 20-3. I think 20-3 is the most pertinent. The owner reserves the right to reject any irregular proposal and the right to waive technicalities if such waiver is in the best interest of the owner and conforms to local laws and ordinances pertaining to the letting of construction contracts. And so throughout the documents, there's mention of the owner's ability to waive informalities. And as we've reviewed the proposals, and even this week as we've received your letter, you're probably already aware of it, but in that bid packet, United Materials was supposed to fill out a letter of intent. That would provide all your subs, and it would qualify which subs might be DBEs. And that's in the instruction to bidders on page, let's see, (2-8). Instruction bidders 2-8. Letter of intent forms shall be submitted with the bid. A separate letter of intent form is required for each proposal's DBE subcontractor. And so the letter of intent turned in by United Materials was not filled out. And so we've got a copy of it here. Again, both of these types of things I would see as informalities. They don't impact the contractor's ability to do the work. They don't impact the pricing of the work. They don't impact, they're not misleading. They're the types of things that happen when there's this much paper to fill out. And ordinarily, I would see both of these things as things that I would recommend we waive. That's been our past practice, that when we do have these irregularities, we do waive them. I understand United Materials certainly is a fantastic contractor. We've done a lot of work with you guys, and you guys have been a great partner. Most of the work that we've done in the last 10 years has been performed by United Materials, I think, when you look at it in total. And so this isn't anything that I see as anything that the airport authority thinks poorly of one contractor versus another. In this case, both proposals have these irregularities. My recommendation of the board is that we overlook all of those irregularities and consider the bids on their primary selection criteria, which is the cost of the project, the bid price on the project. And I would reiterate staff recommendation that we award it to MRTE.
Are there some, let's see, hold for 1 second here. Would your client like to speak, Jean, or would you like to, before we go into the...
Yeah, I just have a couple of comments. I don't see the letter of intent in the bid requirements, John, and I just asked Rob if he could speak to that, and he wasn't aware of that mandate either. The difference, I think, is here we understand the board can overlook errors in a bid proposal, but these aren't errors. These are abject omissions of specific items that are set forth in the bidder's mandates. And so I think there is a difference here with respect to what one standard, a contractor, and again, whether it's United or the next contractor, this isn't simply an informality that, and all of the contractors have to acknowledge the bid requirements. And again, I think that the dangerous issue or precedent that you're setting here is, well, whatever it might be, the board gets to waive it. And so you're going to be considering bids that are non-responsive and incomplete from the very beginning. It simply upends the entire bidding process to waive this situation, which we don't consider an irregularity or an informality. I don't know if Rob, do you have anything to add?
I don't. The only thing I would have to add is on the DBE goal. If there is no specific DBE goal, then it would be 0, which would be, if you don't have any DBE goals and you don't have any DBE subcontractors, there would be no need for a letter of intent for DBE subcontractors. It would be my only thing to add.
No, and I mean, that's certainly a relevant point. We have to turn these in mainly because they track our goals, and that's actually a federal form that's required. Again, I'm frankly sorry we all find ourselves here. I mean, I wish we had, an easier path here. It's definitely a difficult issue, and I do believe, and Mick, you can speak to this. I think emissions, technicalities, there's, I don't know what the technicalities would be other than emissions, and things that aren't quite right. But I mean, throughout the bid documents, it certainly affords for the owner to look over these technicalities and other irregularities. I guess they're called in other places. I wish we weren't in this position. I think both contractors would do a fantastic job. Mick, do you have any thoughts on Jean's comments about the omissions versus a technicality?
First, before you speak, Mick, I don't think we had an introduction from you, so if you are going to respond here, you'll need to introduce yourself.
Mick?
Yeah.
He's probably on mute.
Oh.
One more thing I wanted to say when I get a chance.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think that the contract documents don't necessarily limit themselves to errors or irregularities or informalities. It's, as the sponsor and the owner, you have the right to waive defects or deficiencies in bids. And that's what has happened here. And both bidders had a deficiency or an omission that, in my opinion, is not critical to the validity of the decision. I've made that position clear in my discussions with John and the engineers, that I believe that the motion can be taken, acted upon, and defended.
Mick, I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself for the record, please, and state your address?
I'm sorry, did it not come across?
No, it didn't. You must have been muted.
Okay, I didn't think I was. In any event, this is Mick Tallow, 300 Riverview Drive North, Suite 5. I'm counsel for the Airport Authority.
Thank you. Rob, did you want to speak now then?
I did. So the one question I would have is, at what point do you do you draw the line on an omission or an error? I mean, what if the contractor didn't turn in a 10% bid bond? You know, is that something that would be waived? So from a contractor's standpoint, where is that, where does one draw the line?
You know, I think, you know, certainly anything that, you know, that would cause the bid to be misleading, I think is really important for us to see. You know, I think it's important for the proposal to identify who's doing the work. I've seen that omission before, and that's one I often think is a disqualifying omission if you know the contractor can't perform the percentage of the work, that the prime contractor can't perform the vast majority of the work as they've said they can. You know, I think things that would mislead about their pricing, their ability to complete the project, their experience. I think that's another area that if they're an inexperienced contractor that has not performed similar work and they've omitted their experience, I think those are the key things that protect the public's ability to get the project delivered. You know, those are the key things. You know, the reason that some of these items MRTE has left out are in there is because over the last few 10 years or so, as we've gotten projects in and trying to understand, you know, the project's cost relative to the engineer's estimates we've had in the past, and knowing we have a one bidder environment, we try to learn as much as we can about the nature of those bids. Because we have had a long period of one bidder environment. And so the breakdown of the lump sums, the profit margin, some indication of what's in mobilization has been very helpful for us in justifying those costs to FAA and to the board as we've tried to move those projects ahead. And so, you know, in this case, we're very close to engineer's estimate. Both bids are. I think both contractors did a very good job of estimating the work, and you know, we're confident both of them can do it. Again, I don't think there's a reason either contractor can't do this work. I believe both of them are qualified to do it. I believe they can both deliver it for the cost they've said they can deliver it for. You know, so I mean, those are the bid bond is a good example. I mean, those are required things that we need to have to ensure the work can be completed. You know, those would be important omissions.
This is Commissioner Harris. I think this boils down to the definition of an irregularity, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this or not, so I'm going to ask first, but I looked up a definition on the internet. Am I allowed to introduce this kind of information? It's from the Cornell Law School. It's a legal information institute. Am I allowed to introduce a definition from their website?
Yeah, I
why not?
don't see why you couldn't.
Okay, it says a minor informality or irregularity is one that is merely a matter of form and not of substance. It also pertains to some immaterial defect in a bid or variation of a bid from the exact requirements of the invitation that can be corrected or waived without being prejudicial to other bidders. The defect or variation is immaterial when the effect on price, quantity, quality, or delivery is negligible when contrasted with the total cost or scope of the supplies or services being acquired. The contracting officer either shall give the bidder an opportunity to cure any deficiency resulting irregularity in a bid or waive the deficiency, whichever is to the advantage of the government. So in that definition, I think John is correct. That's my conclusion.
Additional comments or questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, hey, this is Commissioner Lalonde. One question here, you already kind of touched on it a little bit, John, but can you just plain English describe what is actually missing from MRTE's bid, and how material is that to them actually being able to execute the bid?
So as I was kind of referring to earlier, the lump sum breakdowns are things like there's certain items that are bid in a total cost. One of them, for example, is mobilization. So at the beginning of every project, contractors are allowed a mobilization payment in order to get their equipment, their trailer if they're going to have one, all of the setup costs established on their project. And so in their bid, they will bid that as a lump sum number to get those pieces of equipment to the airport, to acquire the personnel that they need should they have to get people from out of town that have to stay in a hotel or something like that. It's basically their setup costs. And so those are the lump sum items. There's also things like permitting that you may have to acquire on the project. In order to do the work, you have to get say a stormwater permit, and you'd have to acquire that from the state. That would be a lump sum item on there. So there's the lump sum items are oftentimes just a number in a proposal. Over the last few years, again, we've been asking for a detail of that so we can understand what that breakdown is. And that's one of the things that's missing from that proposal. The other thing is we also asked for how much profit is built in to the project. And that's also missing from the MRTE proposal. So in their bid of $1.40827, we don't know, we didn't know at the time how much of that they had built profit in, how much profit they had built into that. And again, that was an item that locally we've added over the years to help us better understand our bidding environment. And so those are the things that are missing from the item, or from the MRTE proposal.
If I might, John, I also understood there was a subcontractor amount for the electrical contractor that was missing.
I think that's true also. And Chris, could you speak to that one?
How many lump sum items were there?
Correct. This is Chris Dodge, Jacobs Engineering, 2800 Terminal Drive, 59404.
Airport engineer.
He indicated that Tablet Electric was the electrical subcontractor with them, and did not, I guess, indicate the amount awarded to the subcontract between MRT and Tablet.
What other lump sum items did I miss there, Chris? I got mobilization. We got the electrical sub. Well, there's some other ones.
It was mobilization, traffic control, and road control.
Was there no permitting in there?
Permitting is included typically with the mobilization or traffic control, depending on what type of permits are applied for.
So another lump sum item was for traffic control costs, because we are going to have some lane closures. And so the contractors had to have a plan to provide traffic control in there. And so we asked them to bid that as a lump sum item also.
If I might ask, John, I mean, part of the issue is with mobilization being limited to 10%. How do you know that without that breakdown?
What do you mean by limited?
My understanding is the bid, I don't have it in front of me, but that mobilization cost was limited in this bid to 10%. So how would you know that it met that mandate if you don't have the breakdown?
Chris, was there a specific in there for limiting mobilization costs? I mean, you would know what the overall bid price is because it's not in addition to the bid price, but can you speak to that, Chris, about the specific requirement for a limit on mobilization?
Yes, mobilization is limited to 10%. Both contractors met that 10% goal for their mobilization within their entire schedule that they bid.
But we wouldn't have, I mean, having not had that prior to getting the MRTE materials, I think what she's saying is we wouldn't know for sure that it was less than 10%. I mean, you know what the total bid price is. The mobilization doesn't add to the bid price, but I guess what you're saying is they could have had a non-complying 15% mobilization or something like that.
You wouldn't know that unless you had the breakdown, which then they're later allowed to correct. which again, I think is prejudicial to United Materials. That, you know, as Rob said, where do you draw the line? If you can submit an incomplete bid that's not conforming and then just simply be allowed to correct it, I think you upend the bid process.
You know, and what I would say is, you know, we have these irregularities. I think we had a complaint last time because the proposal wasn't bound. You know, so I think the whole art of this is defining boundaries that make sense. And you know, again, if I felt as though something they had omitted spoke to their ability to complete the project or the cost of the project, you know, those are the critical elements, or their ability to deliver it on time. You know, those are the critical elements that I think the public needs to be protected from. In this case, these are items that help us understand the bid better, that we've put in there locally to help us control the costs. In this case, both bids were well within 2% of the engineer's estimate, and I think we have a good competitive bid process. Both of them had minor deficiencies. My recommendation is that we overlook all of those deficiencies and consider it based on the weight of both proposals.
So the comment with that, John, is that, this is Rob again with United Materials. You indicated that the airport authority has added all these additional requirements because you've had a single bidder environment. Well, all of those requirements that you've added are a lot of additional work for the contractor to fill out and get those items properly. And so the comment has been made, well, if they're not going to be really required, we're not going to fill them out anymore. So, I mean, if you're not going to require them, if you're just going to waive them, then you see what I'm saying?
I certainly understand it, and I think, you know, if we didn't have competitive bids here, you know, that would certainly be a factor. You know, we've tried in the past, sometimes successfully, to improve our ability to bid these projects and bring them in within budgets. And so, you know, as we've had more conversations with the board and with the FAA over the last few years about how best to bring these projects in, you know, and not just on paving projects, but on building projects and other things. This type of material has been the difference between being able to convince the FAA we have good bids and not being able to convince the FAA we have good bids. In some cases, we've had projects that have bid this is not specific at all to any particular contractor. This is across different professions. We've had a couple bids in the last 10 years or so that we've had a very difficult time convincing our regulators and our board that we had competitive bids. And so that's the type of information that enables us to do it. We can look through there and say, okay, you know, there isn't a profit gouging opportunity here because there's one supplier. There isn't a massive amount of overhead being stuffed into the mobilization costs because the contractor feels as though they've got an advantage. You know, and that's why we ask for those materials. In this case, we have good bids that are well within the range of reasonability, and you know that shows us that both of you worked really hard putting together these proposals. They're both good proposals, and I think we would be well advised to work with either contractor with these budgets. I think both of them are good. I would recommend either one. You know, the primary selection criteria in this case is price, and I think, you know, both of them are good on that element, and so that's why we've asked for those. Those have proven instrumental over the last 10 years in helping us to justify projects to get our grant funding and to get it approved by the board, and that's why we ask for them. I agree. It's not optimal to have things missing from the proposal, and we don't encourage anyone to do that. In some environments, I think, you know, it's difficult to get these proposals done in the time frame that you're asked to do them. And I understand asking you for additional work, isn't great. And I think we've tried very hard to be reasonable and only limit this to the information that has helped us to get these projects awarded and get our grant funds in and get them approved by the board.
So what I would say is that, listening to what you just said about that schedule of values breakdown, is it's been a pretty significant tool for you in the bidding process to get these projects awarded.
In some instances, it's been instrumental, sure.
Sure. So in my mind, it would not just be an irregularity or an informality, because it is such a key part of your bids.
John, can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's, of course, Commissioner Evans. The items in question from MRTE were local Great Falls International Airport Authority bid requirements. The item missing or incomplete from United Materials is, I believe you said, a regulatory requirement by the FAA, which, do you have an opinion? I know you're not the FAA and can't pretend to be, but what happens in the case where something like that is not there? I mean, it's a regulator. We don't typically...
Yeah, it's a required form, and I don't know if we've had them in the past that have been, that have been missing, but again, I think it, similar to what we're doing with MRTE, we would ask that it be filled out and included, with our materials that go forward to the FAA as part of our bid documents. I mean, the idea would be it's an informality. It's not it's not a critical piece. I certainly understand what he's saying. They don't have a DVE, that's going to be active on this project, but it is something the FAA tracks, and so that's something we do have to respond to. And so, I mean, it's an irregularity. We have, these do happen. Like I said, the last one I remember was because the proposal wasn't bound. And so, I mean, they come up. I think we have to judge them by what they are and how relevant they are to that proposal, and make a determination. And that's really what we're sitting here today trying to do is make a determination about how compliant these two proposals are and who should be awarded the work.
And I'm struggling at the moment here. It's disadvantaged or business?
Disadvantaged business enterprise.
Okay.
Yeah, as I read the pre-bid requirements, the letter of intent is only required if there is a disadvantaged business enterprise implication. Am I reading that wrong, John?
Where are you at on?
I'm on the bid requirements here on the bottom bullet under DVE, and then only if letter of intent, if it qualifies as a disadvantaged business enterprise.
No, that if you look at in the bid instructions here on page, it's the instruction to bidders issued for bid. This is the packet that you get that tells you how to fill out proposals. Page 2.8, the bidder agrees to complete letter of intent forms for all DBE subcontractors and suppliers the bidder proposes to use to complete the work being bid. The letter of intent form shall be submitted with the bid. A separate letter of intent form is required for each proposed DBE contractor, and so it's one of the required FAA forms that we have to resubmit. And United Materials did submit it; it's just blank. And so what we normally, would have in a bid proposal is this completed with nothing in it. I mean, basically you fill out the top of who you are and what your information is, and then a description to be worked and performed by DBE. You would have no DBE performance or none, or something in that realm.
Other commission comments?
And can I just,
Yeah,
excuse me. And your representation is that MRTE filled that out
They filled it out and said they don't have any. Is that correct, Chris?
Correct.
And Jean? anything?
Yes, great, thank you, sir.
Other commissioners, questions, comments? Or I suppose I should...
Commissioner Gibbs, just, John, in the event that was held up because of these technicalities, what would be the implications of the delay?
So, well, I guess there's two ways it could be held up that I can think of offhand. Number one, the board could table it and pick it up at a later date. Or number two, are you suggesting that the board would throw out both bids and rebid?
No, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking basically a time frame and the availability of the grant. If this were delayed, what were the implications regarding time frame and availability of the grants?
Oh, I gotcha. So FAA's, we're currently scheduling the first cut of grants. I think as the engineer told everybody at the pre-bid meeting, we're currently in the first cut of grants, and so bids are due in this week to the FAA such that they can award the first round of grants. The second round of grants or third round of grants, if there is to be one, or any Tiger type rounds of grants will be down the road. So I would think this week if we can turn the bid, turn in a selected bid, our grant would probably be received in the next 30 to 60 days. If we don't turn in a bid, my guess is we probably would see a grant maybe over the summer. It's all dependent on how many people are working at the FAA this summer. The last few years, the FAA hasn't got the first round of grants out until June, July, I think probably is about the time frame. And then the second round of grants usually comes in September, two to 3 months later. So if that's any indication on a normal year, probably we'd see a grant in, say, June, July. Given that they're down on staffing, that could elongate past the summer season. I don't know when they plan the second or third grant cut this year.
Thank you.
Do they typically tell you that in advance? Yes, I don't know.
No. So the way it works is they have a certain amount of money that they can award, which is for the whole year. And so the first round of grants is generally the airports that have entitlements like us, and they've got their project ready to go, and so they get funded. And then the FAA looks to see what they have left, and then they'll do a second award, which would include discretionary grants and projects that are later, that type of thing. They haven't really started talking about a second cut yet. And we hear through the stimulus bill that there's going to be some other pool of funding coming in also, but we haven't heard the timing of that yet. So the hose is a little bit clogged in terms of what the next steps are for FAA after the first cut of funding, and we wouldn't have a real good idea of when that would come out. I would anticipate it'll probably come over the summer at some point, mid to late summer, because they're going to want to get funds out again this year, I would hope. But yeah.
Thank you. Are there any additional commissioner comments, or I would invite any members of the public to speak at this time?
This is Chad Picard with Jacobs Engineering. I tried to introduce myself at the beginning, but there were some connection issues on that. Jacobs Engineering in Denver, Colorado, 9189, South Jamaica, Englewood, Colorado, 80112. I'll just add that the project is being funded by an AIP grant that we've just discussed. It is a federal project in the FAA Order 5100.38D. It talks about bid protests and appeals. And in this case, the EDO would defer to the local decision-making authorities, which would be the Board Authority and the state, which would govern in this case. So in that instance, I think this may fall under the irregularities and discretion of the board for award based on the contract stipulation and contract amendment to include those few items that are in question here. One thing I'll also note is in the FAA's Section 20 requirements for proposal requirements and award, it does specifically define in 20-09 an irregular proposal, item F, stating if the applicable disadvantaged business enterprise information is incomplete. So that was an item that was discussed earlier. It is of importance to the FAA award of the project, and it's an underlying condition of award under the AIP program in order to get the grants in accordance with the grant assurances.
Right, but I think we could remedy that, by having them fill it out afterwards. I mean, I think we can, there's time to remedy that, I guess is what I'm saying. Should the board choose to throw out the MRT proposal and award it to United Materials, I think there's still time to remedy the DVE goal.
Certainly, yeah. Just wanted to point out that reference. So it seems as though the award is conditioned upon the owner's right to reject any irregular proposal and waive technicality. The ADO would defer to the local authorities on the matter.
Thank you. Asking again, any comment from anyone at this point? Questions, clarifications? At the present time, we have a motion and a second to accept the staff recommendation to award this contract to the low bidder, MRTE. Hearing nothing else at this point, I will do a roll call vote of the question. Commissioner Eretz?
I approve the motion.
Commissioner Gibbs?
I approve.
Commissioner Lalonde?
I approve.
Commissioner Smith?
I approve.
Commissioner Timbo?
I vote again.
I'm sorry?
No. Did you vote no?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And myself, Commissioner Evans, I am going to vote in favor. So with one nay, the ayes have it, and so the motion does pass. That is the only other item on the board meeting agenda. So I will do our typical process here and ask if there are Airport Authority board comments. I'll run through everyone. That's what we typically do. Commissioner Eretz?
I have none.
Commissioner Gibbs?
No.
Commissioner Lalonde?
Ellen?
Commissioner Smith?
I have no comment.
Commissioner Timbo?
No.
And I have none at this time. Additional public comments from anyone, either present or on the call? Hearing none, I will adjourn this board meeting. I know most of you are on the call, but could we take just a couple of minutes here in between before we go into the work session?
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay. Plus, do we need to have someone come in?
turn off the camera. I can
Yeah,
ask
whatever
Melissa.
the.
We're also looking for the school district too, because I
Oh,
think
oh.
they're supposed to be calling in there.
So hold for roughly 5 minutes, everyone.
Or, John, I'm here. This is Jamie Marshall. And
Oh, hi Jamie.
you as well.
So you guys aren't calling in, you're phoning in?